Hello and welcome to an Infinity the Game battle report. Today we're playing Superiority, playing White Banner versus Tohaa. So this is a Tohaa battle report, but for once I am not the Tohaa player. We'll talk about the scenario in a little bit, but first let's look at the lists that were being played. So I've been excited to play this White Banner list for like 3 or 4 days now, where the genesis for this actually was that a friend of mine locally who's sort of come back into the game just a little bit, they are a heavy infantry link player. They played Starmada with the like polyvalent link with all of the all-stars in it back sort of at the beginning of N4. And of course, that kind of link got obliterated by the fire team's change. But they've come back into the game a little bit, and they're doing some very interesting things with, in particular, Foreign Company, but also just our conversations with them have included some content around White Banner. And so it's had me and the local friend group looking at White Banner again, having really like not paid much attention to it for quite some time now. And so, in conjunction with just looking at the faction with fresh eyes after having not looked at it for a little while, plus the lessons learned from Anzac Cup, I put together some lists that they're still kind of first draft, but I've been really excited to play them, and this is one of them. So the obvious similarity here between this and my Anzac Cup lists is this Guija, the Guija Lieutenant. I was able to run a Zeta Lieutenant for every round at Anzac Cup and in testing, and it was just fine. You have to be careful with it, but if all else fails, you hoard your command tokens and they will get you through a turn in loss of Lieutenant. And although the Guija is still like 82 points is not cheap for a tag, it was a huge beneficiary of the mobility update with the change to Super Jump as a Silhouette 7 tag. So, although classically the like Mongolian beef style White Banner list where you have a Blue Wolf is still a very good list, and the Blue Wolf is a very good tag, what the Zeta does is it gives me a lieutenant that occupies a meaningful combat group slot and doesn't need a decoy. Like, I could put in a Zhanchi decoy if I wanted to, but the Guij is going to be obvious from the first turn as soon as I spend that first lieutenant order. And I free myself up from having to have like one Zhanchi and then a Zhanchi decoy, and then I've taken two Zhanchi, so I may as well have a fire team, which puts in a third piece all kind of in one place. And that I wanted to move away from core link teams, like particularly 5-person core link teams in White Banner, because I didn't really feel like they were great value. They have this problem where they still put your two lieutenant candidates in the same place, and you can do some really good independent asset fighting, I think, in White Banner. And so this list tries to test that out. So this is one of a couple of different versions that I have, but in addition to the Guija, it has the Jinquo and two Shaolins link team, and then the Lang Kai and single Shaolin duo. This is my preferred arrangement for these. I don't like putting Jinquo and Lang Kai together. I want to maximize the making Shaolin's regular value. And of the two of them, Jinquo is obviously the one who needs the 3-man fire team bonuses the most. We then have a single Zhanchi hacker, and that is basically roadbot insurance because I do have enough repeaters to make use of it. I've got two Weibing Yao Kongs, Weibing being the forward observer remotes, which means that this list has got 3 tactical awareness orders in addition to lieutenant order. This is really a 19 order list, which I really, really like. And because we're going heavy on remotes, we can then invest in an engineer with 2 Yao Zhaos, and basically we've got 2 Weibings, then we have a Husong total reaction bot, and then we have 2 Long Ya mine layers. Now, I really like if I have the points for it, I will take the heavy shotgun Long Ya, but in this list, I've taken the cheaper mine layer profiles, and that I've taken an Evo hacker. And so the goal is, not necessarily, but if I have to, I want to be able to actually take good surprise shot attacks with the Long Yas. And okay, maybe we put marksmanship on the Husong Yao Kong, but what I actually want to be able to do with the Pangolin, potentially, is to marksmanship a Long Ya and then fire, reload. Now, that's kind of like not going to happen every game, and it didn't happen this game, but it's something that I thought would be interesting to experiment with, although it isn't in some of the other versions of this list that I have. Then finally, we have a single unlinked Shaolin monk. So one of the things that we can immediately see here is that by taking the Guija Lieutenant, there is no model in this entire list that doesn't have some kind of an active role. I can conceivably spend active turn orders on every single model in this list, and I really like that. If I can build a list that does that, I will, because I feel like it gives you a ton of redundancy, even in situations where the Guija dies, for example. Because every trooper in this list can have orders spent on it, it means that a turn in loss of lieutenant is actually not as painful. Like, there are all of these externalities from that. So although this is still a first draft list, and in retrospect I will actually change some of the groups around at minimum, this felt really promising and it performed really well. So this is the list that I played it against, and this is mostly Tohaa good stuff with the caveat that it's running 14 rather than 15 troopers to afford some slightly heavier elements. So the list was, and the fire teams were Drow Mine Layer, Sakiel Viral Combi, EM Grenades McCall, Ektros Kael'thar McCall, and then Kael'thar Nima McCall. So there's two specialists in this. One link doesn't have specialists. Every link has some kind of a gun, and then Tactical Lieutenant +1 order with a Spitfire. So you have another firepower piece in the list that way between the AP Marksman Rifle, HMG, and then Spitfire. Delegate, Axe Auxilla, and Motorized Bounty Hunter. This being superiority, we would both also have a Breaker Rifle CSU. Each of us put that in the first combat group. Now, one thing that was going to cause this list to struggle is although it's got an AP Marksman Rifle, a Breaker Rifle, a Panzerfaust, thanks to Nima, and then the Breaker Rifle from the CSU in this scenario, there's not going to be a ton of heavy firepower here. And Ektros with a heavy machine gun is the next heaviest gun after the AP Marksman Rifle, effectively, which means that the fact that I have a tag, this list is insufficiently hostile to tags, and my opponent would actually struggle under that for most of the game. I had to be wary of breaker rifles, but otherwise it was the McCalls that would be the biggest threat to the Guija, and of all tags, a Guija is one of the most resistant to McCalls. Not to foreshadow how the game that would go, but we'll see some of that in play. But otherwise, this is a good Tohaa list. I think it would benefit. The Ektros is probably the weakest link. I will justify every other piece in this list, including the Spitfire attack wheel, including Nima Sitar with the breaker combi. I actually really like that. I think for 35 points, that's an incredible bargain profile for what you get for the 35 points. Unsurprisingly, frenzy discount with only light melee attack, it's melee stats, etc. But the Ektros is kind of letting this list down. If this Ektros was and to an extent the Drow, it's expensive, but it's okay. If this Ektros was, say, a Sukwell HMG, you could probably trim some points elsewhere and then get a Sukwell K1 Sniper. You have SWC for that, and at that point, the list becomes considerably scarier into my list, although I think I still have a fairly good game. In any case, we're playing Superiority, which is one of the new direct action missions, but it really is just Supremacy. It is Supremacy that you don't need a classified deck for. So the other changes, it has the same zones, it has the same 4 buttons of which you'll need to press 3 and you can share with your opponent. Otherwise, what it has is the free CSU, and then one trooper gets chosen as a TAC Ops or something like that. It has some generic name that gets the dodge +3 and tactical awareness rules if it doesn't already have them. That's actually really awkward for my list because I kind of want to give it. I mean, the Guija would be great, but the Guija already has tac awareness. Jinquo would be great, but she already has dodge +3. But I go with the engineer. The engineer does not have either of those. Dodge might save it, and it will use tac aware over the course of the game. My opponent here is going to make it one of their Kael'thars in the hopes of surviving the game, just so that it can score that point at the very end. Now, the other reason we're playing Superiority, just as a backstory to this game, is that I did the usual. We're playing Superiority because I was a coward. Specifically, my opponent said, "Hey, yep, I'd love a game. What do you want to play?" And I did the "I don't know, you choose. I'm fine with anything," before realizing who I was talking to, because my opponent Owen here is to scenarios what Dr. Frankenstein was to casual biology. And so I very quickly had to backtrack from that and say, please no, not something. Not something as interesting as it would be to play whatever insanity he suggested. I actually did want to practice for like maybe a tournament and or have this as a viable battle report. And so playing a game where like every single trooper hidden deploys or something is amusing, but not what I was specifically going for the first outing of a list. So we're playing Superiority. With a Whip 14 Lieutenant, Owen wins the game and elects to deploy second, given the superiority scoring. And so I elected to go first because I'm not giving him both deployment advantage and turn advantage. So here's the table setup after deployment. And so from left to right, we've got my Pangolin Evo Hacker, one of the Longyars with its mine, Jinquo's Shaolin Monk team here, here, and here, with Jinquo in the center, the Guija as the obvious reserve drop. There's the Group 2 Weibing, there's the Group 2 Shaolin Monk is on these stairs here. We have the Husong Yaokong in a relatively central position with the engineer next to it. The Hacker, the Zanshi Hacker, the Robot Insurance is down here. Then we have the other Longyar with its mine there, the other Weibing, and then Liang Kai is there, and his Shaolin Monk, you might see here, proxied by a Guangxi, because I only have so many Shaolins, is here and here. And then we have the first and second helper bots for the engineer in those positions. So immediately there's a very slight mistake, I would say, with this, or not necessarily mistake, but how I've placed the pangolin. It's within 8 inches of this long yar, so this long yar potentially can reload if I wanted to, but I've put myself in a situation where I don't have a repeater coverage over the Husong Yaokong. So going first, you are most likely going to support where the Husong Yaokong if you're going to support where anything, and I just don't have a repeater near it. There are only 2 repeaters in this list, so I think it's possible that maybe I should have had the Evo Hacker here, but if I'd done that, I would be vulnerable probably from plunging fire from this rooftop because it has a very fat base. So failing that, I probably needed to have maybe this Wei Bing Yao Kong perhaps hanging out up here. That would have given me repeater coverage to let me marksmanship the Husong Yao Kong. For my opponent's part, you can't really see everything here, but the pertinent issues is we have a Droll standing with a Symbiomate on this rooftop over here, and then we have Nima's fire team hanging out kind of here, and the Ektros's fire team in there with, I think, the reserve drop was the Lieutenant Takwil, and it deployed here. So this Droll is going to be the biggest sort of like issue to start with, but my opponent has also put a Kautar specialist on this rooftop before I've deployed the Guija, with the intention of making it his tac ops, so that it can just crawl forward up this rooftop and be in the zone, which is not a bad call, but he should have changed his decision on who would be the tac ops as soon as this Guija dropped because of what would happen on the first turn. So I go first, and there is some impetuous, but then apart from that, the Guija, which is this tall, super jumps easily up to there, and then it's standing in one short skill there, and it blows this poor dude away. Takes it out basically on the first order of the game, and then it hops back around and down this way. Actually, I think, sorry, the first thing it does is it moves around and it fights this Droll. And this face-to-face roll is important because the odds are not great, but I am at least ranging the Droll. So from this position here, taking this shot up there, I have the Droll at like 30 inches. So it takes 2 shots, it's in a link. It fires twice on 7s, I fire 4 times on 8, and I get a hit through, knock the Symbiomate off but don't wound the Droll, and at that juncture it does kind of wisely decide to drop prone. And then we take our jump up and we kill the Kael'thar. And that's basically all that the Guija will do this turn, but that is not bad. So we've gotten 1 kill, but I basically am of the opinion that the Droll is the next thing that needs to die. It is always very difficult to really hammer into Tohaa on the first turn because of Symbiomates, effectively. They will give a turn of ablative defense. But if you can do damage, it's really valuable. And in particular, you want to try and nibble away at their capabilities. Not necessarily like their order pool or like you want to take out pieces. You want to spend the effort to punch through the Symbiomate defense to take out things that can threaten you. And so with the Guija having spent 3 orders, tack away a lieutenant and then its regular order to get that 1 kill and the Symbiomate down, then it's Lang Kai's time to shine. Now, for future games, I think I will probably actually put Lang Kai in Group 2, because what he needed to do, he could have done with the Group 2 orders. Basically, he runs out and around this way, and then hops up and nuts the Droll. And that takes like 1 order, 2 order, it takes like maybe 4 orders to get that kill. And at that point, I stop, because although there is a McCall hanging out prone behind Lang Kai, if I take that fight in my active turn, I will spend 1 more order, and I'm not even particularly guaranteed to kill the McCall, and I want to make my opponent spend the orders to come after Lang Kai. The McCall is frustratingly better than Lang Kai in close combat, but I would rather just make it my opponent's problem to try and solve. So we just stop, we just leave Lang Kai there. What that does mean, though, is that those are basically the only kills that will be scored this game. The bulk of the rest of the turn is just repositioning stuff. And with the Guija, so the Guija has to be made safe, so it's going to spend a couple of orders to end up, I think, over here. Watching kind of like this line down there, basically hoping to cover Lang Kai, so that if the McCall comes around, I will be able to kill it. Otherwise, the old faithful Group 2 Wei Bing with a bunch of orders runs up here, presses this button, runs up there, presses this button, fails, presses it again, succeeds, and ends up something like here. And that's 2 buttons pressed, 1 and 2, which is some nice scenario headway. Otherwise, I already have things in zones because of the long yars, and now we've got the Wei Bing Yao Kong hanging out here, some monks move forward. That's basically a good turn. I think the Chai actually has enough orders, so the Wei Bing actually has enough orders to come down here and move to there and go into suppressive fire. So lesson learned, either Group 2 doesn't need a 6-trooper disposition, or Lang Kai should be in that group, and I think it's the second. Still, so that's 2 casualties inflicted on my opponent, which under normal circumstances would be a pretty moderate, like some scenario ground has been gained, but it's superiority slash supremacy. So that's not enough. Like you need a lot more scenario ground. You really need to do damage going first in this kind of scenario, which I haven't done, but it's Tohaa. So that's okay. You are not going to do as much damage against Tohaa going first. You have to kind of wear that, and you have to wear them down over the course of the game. And having taken out 1 of 3 symbiomates and the Drall and like a little bit of the order pool, we're going to call that okay. So for my opponent's part, he sets about doing a couple of things. The first is that the McCall will come around. It will actually it will impetuous, and Lankai will dodge the flamethrower. I will shoot with the Guija. The Guija will miss or lose the face-to-face roll, and McCall will throw down smoke. I think, in retrospect, I should actually have just templated with Lankai. I was putting a little bit too much on a potential face-to-face roll with the Guija, and Lankai at this juncture should have sold himself as best he could. But in the absence of that, so the McCall gets smoked down and then it ganks Lankai in close combat. McCalls are very good in close combat. Its margin of advantage is not that high, but it puts Lankai to hitting on 20s while it's sitting on 22s or 23s. So it puts down Lankai, then it gets basically runs down here, gets some smoke down there, and then puts the Shaolin monk that Liang Kai was friends with down as well. And it just beats both of them in close combat, which, as playing Yu Qing in this situation, is very embarrassing. Under normal circumstances, like, it was really nice having those stealth melee pieces. That's a thing that Yu Qing has that other factions just, like, don't. I was getting dodges against that McCall, and some of those dodges made the McCall spend, like, 1 extra order. Being able to just stealth at your opponent with Lang Kai, like, that Drall didn't get an ARO until Lang Kai hit him in close combat, which was really good. But in this case, the McCall being just a superior CC fighter, very embarrassing from the Yu Qing perspective. So that McCall puts down Lang Kai and his Shaolin Monk, and then the Ektos is going to come up and around here. You can't see it in the photo, but there's basically like a little safety nook of low walls there. It taunts the Longya, which chooses not to reveal, and then it moves around, takes a face-to-face roll with the Husong Yaokong and puts it down, but not dead. And those are really the only casualties that will occur this turn. The Breaker Combi Rifle, which is back here, CSU moves around to take a face-to-face roll with the Guija, and it's the last order in that group, and it actually puts a wound on the Guija, which is, again, kind of awkward at the range that it was firing at, but these things happen. I missed, it hit 1 shot, I failed my save. However, that is basically all of the ground that Tohaa are able to push forward. There's like an inconclusive face-to-face roll with Nima, firing a Burst 1 Panzerfaust against the Guija. Basically, both shots, I think both shots miss. I think maybe we even roll identical rolls. But although Tohaa are able to push up into these 2 zones, they don't press any buttons. So the scenario, I maintain my scenario progress. I'm down I'm actually down 3 models. Tohaa are only down 2, so they are nominally up on attrition, but I have that scenario advantage that I've accrued. I've banked those orders, basically. So we can see this is a picture at the beginning of my second turn, how things have moved forward. So the Guija is in a progressed state. The CSU has moved up to here. The Husong Yaokong is unconscious. This Weibing Yaokong has moved forward, having pressed those buttons. So although I am in probably on paper kind of a disadvantaged position relative to the start of the game, it's really important to note that I'm down 3 troopers, I'm down 3 orders, but many of my pieces are positioned in places where they don't need as many orders to attack. This Guija has been staged into the midfield now, so it doesn't need to spend those orders to move. This Weibing actually is going to do some things this turn as well, so it is staged into the midfield, so it can do things efficiently. And that matters, like remembering that you might be down on troops, but your game state has progressed, can be really interesting and useful to remember. So there are basically, I don't need to do too much on the scenario front this turn. The attack awareness Weibings are going to carry me. I've already got 2 buttons, and indeed this turn the Weibing is just going to use its attack awareness to move over there and press the button first time. And that's kind of the ideal use, I think, for forward observer emotes, is just to slowly grind away at scenario kind of for free. I absolutely love them in this season for that. I don't use them for gunfighting very much. I use them for utility. Otherwise, there's going to be kind of two attacks that will happen. The first is the Guija, which is it's got 2 free orders, so it will use those to put down the motorized bounty hunter down here, and it will have a fight with I think it will actually put down and kill the CSU as well, just to take out some of the irregular pieces. I would like to go after the McCall hanging out down here, but I'm just not able to. The Guija is going to end the turn hanging out up on this rooftop, just trying to be kind of as safe as possible from whatever I think might kill it under overwatch of the Husong Yaokong, which the TAC officer mechanic will use its tactical awareness order to fix back up. Otherwise, the attack this turn is Jing Quo's team and the Wei Bing Yaokong pushing up over and around this way. Now, the Wei Bing itself is not going to do that much. It's just going to stage to be annoying. But Jing Quo is going to make an attack. And so she, with her monk buddies, comes up here, climbs up there, comes around here, and she sees this McCall and puts him down. And then she's going to come around there and see Nima Sitar and pop through her symbiomate and put her prone. And there's a McCall that's crawled forward into this safety box down here that I don't want to fight with Jinquo because it will just flamethrower her and kill her, and she can't kill it in close combat. Once again, we have the highly embarrassing state of Yuqing not being able to, like, I have all of this smoke and stealth close combat, and I can't freaking use it because McCalls are the forward Tohaa elements, and they are better than me. But what I can do is just move a Haris-linked Shaolin Monk around, trade a Chain Rifle for a Flamethrower, both are burst 2, and so the McCall goes down and the Shaolin goes to dead, but the McCall is cleared. So the Haris is broken at that point, but Jinquo is still all the way up here already, so she runs up and around here onto these staircases, and she puts down the there's a Kael'tar specialist in this room, so that's the second Kael'tar down, so now all possible chain of command is gone. I don't have enough orders to come around the corner into melee with the Ektros, because my group 1 has taken most of the casualties so far, but the Wei Bing does come all the way around there, and it sets up in suppressive fire there, which also gives me a repeater network on the Ektros, and it gives me some points that are staged sort of forward into these zones. So in terms of kills, once again, the Tohaa player has only really lost, like, I think, what did we do? We killed 2 McCalls, which is good, and a motorized bounty hunter. So we've killed 5 total things over the course of the entire game so far. Tohaa are going into their second turn with 9 models still available, but we've trimmed down their capabilities. We're also very ahead on scenario. We're staged nice and far forward. The Guija is in a relevant zone. I've got 3 buttons pressed, so we're in a good state as far as scenario goes. And unpicking kind of this situation with Jinquo and the little helper bot is going to be very difficult. The decision my opponent makes about how to play the game is to make a run on the Guija. And this is actually, we work through this together, but this is a textbook in kind of how to play Tohaa. Under normal circumstances, like almost any other list, any other faction would look at, they have basically no guns left. They certainly have no guns left that can range the Guija because it's too far back to be engaged by Nima Sitar's breaker rifle. She only has 1 Panzerfaust left. Yes, it is wounded, but there's no feasible gunfight against it. Even if the Ektros wants to fight it, the Ektros is going to get hacked every single time it takes a face-to-face roll. But because this is Tohaa, they have visibility control because of Eclipse, both Mirror Ball and Eclipse grenades. And the TAC wheel officer, although it began the game here, has moved all the way over to here using its second group's orders in the last turn. So we workshop this out the way that you want to as Tohaa, which is you jump ahead to the desired state and then work backwards how to get there, knowing that you have the ability to control visibility. And so the viable kill run on my opponent has is that this McCall down here comes up some stairs there, up these stairs there, and into CC with the Guija. And if it does that, and it wins enough face-to-face rolls, it can potentially put the Guija down. So how do we do that? Well, we need basically 2 or 3 things of smoke. And what can put those down? The TAC wheel officer. So the TAC wheel officer moves, places the first smoke, moves into that, and it can, because it's zone of control Eclipse with Mirror Ball, smoke, smoke, smoke. It needs to succeed 3 of 4 attempts, which is pushing it a little bit, but it does. And so we end up basically with this situation here, where it's moved around, it's laid down this smoke, it moves into that smoke and lays down that smoke, and then jots down there and lays down this smoke, which does take 2 goes. And then through that, basically, with the Guija has been stuck in the smoke as well. So the McCall just has a free run. None of these gaps is bigger than the size of a base, so there's not going to be any arrows through. McCall runs through there, hops up to there and around there. And although the Guija finally makes a dodge, the McCall is able to get to the edge of this smoke and then whoop dodge into close combat through a flamethrower, and then it starts fighting the Guija. And it wins. So the Guija is on 19s because of martial arts -3 and martial arts on the McCall. The McCall is on 23s, so it has a 4-point advantage, 3 of which are just modifiers to its roll, which is very good. But it is still fighting a wounded, but it is still fighting a tag. And it wins the first face-to-face roll and puts another wound on me. And then it wins the second face-to-face roll, but I pass my saves. And it does not win the third face-to-face roll. I roll like a 16, and it rolls 6 plus 3, and it cops 2 damage, 17 hits from that big-ass sword, and it goes down. And with it basically goes my opponent's chance of the game. This was a really good play, because if the Guija had gone unconscious, then I had 3 command tokens to play through my last turn, and I still had plenty of scenario game, but it would have given my opponent by far the biggest window to try and play things out. But as it was, the McCall didn't quite make it. That cost the majority of my opponent's orders, and from there, I was able to basically deliver the coup de grace. We didn't play all of it out, but I did have the Guija hop down here, and into melee with the tack wheel officer, and knob him, put him down, and with both of the Kael'tars dead, that put my opponent in loss of lieutenant. I also put the Ektros down with a combination of Jinquo and the Guija shooting it. It had been immobilized trying to fight something. So that put down basically all of my opponent's remaining heavy assets, and he had 2 command tokens, and he was a loss of lieutenant. Nima could feasibly have taken a shot and tried to kill the Guija, but I'd scored scenario that previous turn. And so there was basically nothing my opponent could do. At worst, it was going to be a 6-2 win, but in the end, it was almost certainly going to end up being an 8-1. So overall, this was, I think, a bit of a showcase in some of the things that Tohaa could do, but I also really liked this list. I'm learning how to play aggressive no backup tag lieutenants. I kind of learned that with the Zeta, and I think White Banner is potentially a really interesting place to carry through that kind of experiment. So definitely enjoyed it. Really liked this game. Really like this list, although there are changes that I'm going to make for the next version. I'm going to try dialing back the amount of remotes. I'm going to try shifting some groups around. In particular, Leng Kai, I think, is going to grow into group 2. So in any case, that's the report for this evening. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.